Confusingly enough, our second episode of this series is going to cover the first Exalted weapon, Valkyr Talons, which are accessed through the Hysteria ability. Much like Exalted Blade, this ability very much shows its age, from its somewhat unremarkable stats to its heavy-handed balancing measures, but it has a few tricks up its sleeve that make it hit incredibly hard. Under very specific circumstances, you'll see what I mean. So, Valkyr Talons are accessed by Valkyr's fourth ability, Hysteria. Despite what you might think based on their name, the Talons are actually not a claw-type weapon, but instead kind of a hybrid between a claw weapon and a sparring weapon. This ability's central gimmick is that it makes Valkyr completely immune to all damage, status effects, and knockdowns while it's active. This is very powerful, sure, but it has some pretty massive caveats we'll get into a bit later. It's important to note that this invincibility only applies to Valkyr while she's actually using the Talons, and it goes away if she swaps to her primary or secondary, even if the ability is still active. Many on-damage effects in Arcanes, like Arcane Avenger, can also still proc while you're invincible, for whatever reason. Any status effects that Valkyr has when casting Hysteria will play out for their remaining duration, though it doesn't normally matter that much because she's still invincible. Moving on to the stats of the weapon, it deals 250 damage at base, scaling with power strength just like Exalted Blade. Its damage is an even split between Puncture, Impact, and Slash, which kinda sucks as it means you can't easily lean your status weighting in favor of Slash procs. Not that you'd even want to, because the status chance is only 10%, and unlike Excalibur, Valkyr has no chromatic blade to save her on this one. The critical chance is absolutely insane though, being tied with Desert Wind for the highest base crit chance of any melee at 50%. The critical multiplier is only average at 2 times, but with how huge her crit chance is, that's honestly hardly an issue. The weapon also has a pretty high attack speed at 1.5 and a full follow through of 100%, which are both very good. Unfortunately, things aren't looking so good for the weapon's range, which is an abysmal 1.7 meters, meaning anything outside of boy-kissing range will be too far for your T-Rex arms to reach. Another valuable but somewhat peculiar stat tied to the Talons is their innate 5% lifesteal. But cool kid, you ask, doesn't Hysteria make you invincible? Why yes, astute viewer, it does, so I don't really know why this even exists. I'm guessing it's so you can heal from the damage you took before entering Hysteria, but it's generally not that impactful in my experience. It can be nichely helpful, and it's worth keeping in mind, but moment to moment I rarely think about it. While I normally wouldn't point these numbers out, I also want to highlight that the Talon's slide attack deals 750 damage, and the heavy attack deals 2083 damage. Keep these numbers in mind, they will be important later. So let's take a look now at the stance. I'm gonna keep it straight with you all on this one. Things aren't looking good. The stance has virtually no damage multipliers on any attacks, and while it has a couple knockdowns and strangely even a few attacks that open enemies to finishers, it's just got nothing really going for it. The combos are all kinda samey and don't really feel that distinct from one another. The animation speed for this stance is also just really slow, meaning that the 1.5 attack speed on the Talons isn't as good as you'd expect because the stance is just so meandering. On the bright side, whenever Valkyr is in Hysteria, she does this somersault animation while jumping, which I find irrationally hilarious. So, taking a look at the individual combos, let's start with the neutral combo. Its last 4 hits are all 360 hits, and the last hit opens enemies to finishers, though this finisher window is very brief. There's a little bit of forward movement on the combo, but not much, and again the lack of multipliers just make it really lackluster. The forward combo's only noteworthy property is that the last hit is a 360, but the last 2 hits also have almost no forward movement, so why is this even the forward combo? It feels really awkward with how much it limits your movement, and anything it does the neutral combo just does better if you ask me. The neutral block combo carries you an okay distance on the first 2 hits, with the second hit opening enemies to a very limited finisher window and the final hit knocking down. Our final combo, the forward block combo, has a lot of multi-hit attacks with the last hits knocking enemies down, but it feels really start-stop, which makes it kinda cumbersome to use. Okay, so that all sounds pretty bad, and I'm gonna level with you. It is. But this stance does have a few weird tricks up its sleeve. The first one is the heavy attack multiplier, which is 500% on top of a 400% damage slam on the first heavy, with the second being a series of 4 100 damage hits, both of which also lift enemies, implying they survive. 500% is actually pretty normal for a heavy attack modifier, but the 400% damage slam nearly doubles its damage for free. This heavy attack is very strong, especially the first hit, and it reduces most things that connect with it to dust. This also makes Tennokai a decent option on Valkyr, as she benefits from keeping her combo up to throw out these powerful heavies. The second thing of note is the ground finisher, which is a series of 5 hits that all deal 1000% damage each. This kinda makes the knockdowns from her normal combos useful, as well as knockdowns from other sources like slams, as enemies hit with ground finishers take so much damage it'll probably kill them 30 times over. The final trick up this stance's sleeve is the one most of you have probably been waiting for me to talk about this entire time, and that's the slide attack. You remember how the slide attack deals 750 damage, which is already 3 times more than the weapon's base damage normally? Well, the slide attack inflicts that 750 damage hit 6 times in very rapid succession. This single move is the entire reason I have a slide attack macro on my mouse, because it's so powerful it makes almost the entirety of the rest of the moveset totally worthless at the cost of giving you carpal tunnel. If you need something or someone gone, then a simple Control E will just remove them from the game. It's so good, in fact, that it's incredibly centralizing, making Hysteria's only real attack, the slide attack, as nothing else even comes close. It does a ton of damage, gives her a lot of mobility, hits all around her, it's everything her other combos aren't, which makes her feel very one-note. Valkyr's gameplay boils down to sliding across the floor like it's still Parkour 1.0 while straining the hell out of your hand to input the slide attack over and over. This move is Hysteria, and you're going to be using it a lot. Fortunately, I know a lot of you don't play Valkyr for her abilities, so I'm pleased to tell you that if you place a slide attack macro on your mouse, she can be very effectively played with one hand. Okay, so that was a lot to go over, but we have a bit of backtracking to do. Now that we're through all the stats and stance stuff, I want to revisit the invincibility mechanic. You remember how I mentioned that this invincibility comes with a lot of caveats? Well, now it's time to elaborate on that. Those of you with a keen eye might notice that whenever you enter Hysteria, you'll receive this debuff on your HUD. This debuff keeps track of 2 things: the amount of damage you've taken while in Hysteria, and how long you've had it active. Sort of. Basically, when you cast the ability, the debuff will start at 0%, and your energy drain will be the standard 2.5 per second. However, over the course of 40 seconds, this percentage will climb up to 100%, during which your energy drain will climb from that initial 2.5 per second all the way up to 15 per second. The energy drain increase is reset if the ability is recast, and switching to your primary or secondary will pause the meter, though you'll still lose energy based on what your percentage was before you switched. At maximum percentage, the lowest you can get your energy drain on Hysteria is 3.75, which isn't terrible, but is still pretty high compared to many other Exalted melees. Okay, so if the percentage resets when the ability is dispelled, then just exit and re-enter Hysteria every once in a while, right? Well, while that is the best way to keep the drain down, it does have its own concerns. Remember how I said the UI debuff also keeps track of how much damage Valkyr has taken while in Hysteria? More specifically, it stores 30% of all the damage she takes while invincible, and this damage is calculated before resistances like armor or shield DR. Why is that important? Well, because of this ring that surrounds Valkyr while in Hysteria. It starts at 5 meters and gradually expands to 20 meters, though its radius is reduced by 1 meter for every kill, down to its minimum of 5 meters. Why would you want the ring to be as small as possible? Well, if Valkyr's Hysteria is dispelled while any enemies are within this ring and in line of sight of her, then she takes 25% of all the stored damage instantly. Wait, she takes 25% of the stored damage, which is 30% of the damage she's taken? Why doesn't she just store 7.5% of the damage she takes and then deal all of it as damage so the UI element is clearer? Whatever. The important thing about this damage is that it can bypass shield gating, which can result in Valkyr's instant death. To reiterate, this does require enemies to be in line of sight of Valkyr for her to take the damage, but after Dante Unbound, line of sight abilities will count any enemy within 5 meters as being within line of sight no matter what, so funnily enough that change actually kinda nerfed Valkyr. A weird quirk of this stored damage is that it's possible to reset by switching to your primary or secondary, and then switching back, but keep in mind that it resets at the moment the Talons are re-equipped, not at the moment the primary or secondary is equipped. Even so, this can let you quickly swap to your gun and then back to the Talons so you can dispel them safely. Or you can just, pack up and switch zip codes. The wiki says that being invisible can prevent you from taking the damage, but it doesn't, so that's funny. These 2 mechanics, the energy drain increasing over time and the damage when dispelling the ability, create a ton of friction so as to counterbalance the invincibility Valkyr gets. Much like Excalibur, these Talons come from an era of the game trying to be balanced, and as such, being outright invincible was actually pretty strong back then. As such, DE decided that instead of removing the mechanic outright, they were just going to make Valkyr suffer as much as possible in exchange for its continued existence. While things like high efficiency and duration, Arcane Energize, Emergence Dissipate, and even just dipping in and out of Hysteria can all help offset these limiting factors, they are still just really annoying to deal with. Alright, the last thing I want to talk about before we get into how to get the most out of Hysteria are the Augments, and you heard that right, there are multiple. As I see it, the Augments can be broadly classified as the good one and the bad one, which is especially noteworthy because they can't be equipped at the same time. Let's start by taking a look at the good one, Enraged. Enraged is a really interesting augment because it fundamentally changes Valkyr's relationship with Hysteria. So, this augment gives the Talons 200% more damage and critical chance, both of which are additive with mods and are not affected by stats like strength. The energy drain over time on Hysteria is also completely removed, which is a huge deal. So what's the catch? Well, Enraged gives Hysteria a 15-second duration, and once that duration runs out, Hysteria then goes on cooldown for 15 seconds. If you don't use up the full duration, you'll still be slapped with a cooldown matching however long you were in Hysteria. So if you only use it for, say, 5 seconds, you'll then be locked out of it for 5 seconds when dispelling it. The duration of Hysteria does scale with duration mods when using this augment, but you have to keep in mind that every second you spend in Hysteria will be matched with a second where it's entirely unusable. This augment is great if you find yourself only going into Hysteria every now and again, as it makes it a very potent moment of power type of ability that's also far more cost effective than Hysteria is normally. If you're like me though, and you basically live in your exalted weapon most of the time, this augment gets in the way of that playstyle. It also still has the damage ring, so if the duration runs out while you're near an enemy, you'll probably kill yourself. Hey, Editing Cool Kid here. Something I discovered while working on this video, as you just saw, is that if you're using Enraged, then for some reason you actually can shield gate the dispel damage. I'm so wired to get clear of enemies when the timer runs out that I actually never realized this was the case, and it's honestly probably a bug, but I wanted to make it clear that you actually won't kill yourself, you'll just eat your shield gate. So, moving on to the bad one, we have Hysterical Assault. If you're aiming with Hysteria and you attack an enemy, you'll hit them with that Uwu pounces on you from up to 50 meters away, scaling with range. This mod deals damage on hit equal to a normal hit from the Talons, except it can't crit, which is like the main thing the Talons do. You can pounce on enemies during certain one-handed actions like Ripline, which is a thing, I guess. This augment does let Valkyr close distance quickly, which can kinda help with her bad range, but it locks you out of both of your block combos, which, to be fair, you probably weren't using anyways. I just find this augment to be so exceedingly niche that I don't really find it worth the mod slot personally. It does have one peculiar and useful property though. The Pounce provides Valkyr with Invincibility, even if she switches out of Hysteria for a brief period. This lets her use the Pounce and then switch to her guns for a moment while still being immune to damage. Even so, this augment isn't even so much as okay, if you ask me, and while I'm not trying to knock anybody who finds it fun, I don't personally recommend it. Okay, now that we've gotten all the basic information about Hysteria in order, let's talk about what stats it wants. Critical chance is obvious, and that can be done with the Sacrificial set, an Adarza Kavat, Arcane Avenger, or even the Gladiator set on your regular melee. Dipping in and out of Hysteria makes maintaining the Gladiator set easier, and you can also use Paralysis to get finishers for Melee Crescendo, which can let your melee maintain its combo count autonomously. Even beyond that, if you have a Gladiator mod on Hysteria and then place the rest of the set on your regular melee, for some reason the Talons will be able to generate the Gladiator set bonus using their own combo counter. Don't ask me how this is allowed, I just work here. With the Slide Attack being the only move you'll care about much of the time, the Talons are also a prime candidate for Maiming Strike. Oh, yeah. Critical damage is also an obvious stat, which can easily come from Tenacious Bond, as well as things like red and purple Archon shards. The abysmal range also needs to be addressed, but it can be pretty easily remedied with either Primed Reach and or Spring-Loaded Blade, though I do find Spring-Loaded Blade to be a bit annoying to activate on account of the low status chance. You can beef up the status chance using 60/60 mods, or you can go all in on damage if you want to rely entirely on critical hits. You can also use some kind of primer companion, like Diriga, Tazakor, or a Panzer, to help make up for the lack of debuffs spread by the Talons themselves. The attack speed, despite already being fairly high, is handicapped by the slow speed of the stance, which serves as the perfect segue into examining how Valkyr's wider kit can help out her Talons. So, the attack speed issue has a pretty obvious solution in Warcry, which boosts Valkyr's melee attack speed. With the Eternal War augment, maintaining this buff is incredibly easy, as you get duration back with each melee kill, up to double Warcry's duration. The armor increase from a Warcry can also help you survive the damage inflicted by Hysteria being dispelled, but I'd recommend trying to just not take that damage at all. Valkyr's Paralysis can open enemies up to finishers, which does let you see the really cool custom animations that the Talons have, but the ground finishers are the real star of the show in this department, so it's really nothing amazing. The Prolonged Paralysis augment can also help make up for the short range of the Talons by pulling enemies to Valkyr. It has a range of 10 meters at base, and also knocks enemies down, which can let Valkyr take advantage of her insane ground finisher multiplier. It does have some problems though. For one, Paralysis is a full body action, so it locks you into the animation with no movement, while also being fairly slow. Its pull is also gradual, so it takes some time for the enemies to actually get to you. Enemies that are in some kind of stun animation, like a heat, impact, or electric proc, that are knocked down, or that are ragdolled also can't be pulled in, which means that priming with certain elements can just make the augment straight up not work. Honestly, if you want to close the distance between yourself and enemies, I'd recommend just slapping pull on Valkyr instead. It's much faster, has better range even when diminished by the helmet, and it's only a one-handed action, so it doesn't interrupt everything else you're doing. Speaking of helmet abilities, Lycath's Hunt can also be very good on Valkyr for managing her high energy consumption. By using either Equilibrium or Purple Shards, you can turn the health orbs your melee kill spawn into energy, which is a valuable effect. Beyond any utility purpose, Eclipse, Roar, and Zata's Whisper are also good boosts to damage if you have any abilities on Valkyr you just don't really care for, and Nourish can also be helpful for managing her rough energy economy as well. You might have noticed that as I've talked about Valkyr's kit, I haven't brought up Ripline, and that's because it's kinda not great. Minor side tangent, can we make this ability preserve your momentum like Teshin's Grapple does in the new war? That move is super fun, and I would love to see those properties added to Ripline. Honestly, just make Ripline exactly like Teshin's Grapple and it would be perfect. Alright, that's Hysteria, another Exalted so ancient that it was the progenitor of the entire weapons as abilities concept. While there was a time where it was meta for its invincibility, DE whacked this ability with the nerf bat so much that in the modern age it's been left looking pretty disfigured from all the poor treatment. This weapon is the absolute definition of a one-trick, spin-to-win powerhouse, but by god does it do that very, very well. Unlike most of its contemporaries, almost all of Hysteria's gimmicks actively work to make it worse, but even so, it's definitely workable and even pretty strong, so long as you don't value your phalanges. Despite the fact that you can make it quite strong, it absolutely shows its age, and while this might sound weird, I really hope I have to remake this video one day. Better stance multipliers, less energy consumption, not instantly dying if you bump the 4 key, there are plenty of things that would be the case in a perfect world. Unfortunately, we do not live in a perfect world, as is evidenced by my continued existence.